All right. So this past weekend was Ottawa's Capital Pride Parade. And our first post here comes from the Post Millennial. And it's a photo of Fae Johnstone. And they say the biological male who was Grand Marshal for the Pride Parade. And Faye decided to wear a shirt promoting violence against those who oppose child sex changes at Friday's March for Trans Rights. You can see here that Faye is sporting this Protect Trans Kids t-shirt with the photo of a knife and a dove with some sort of flower. And anyway, I don't know what the symbolism is for that one, but this is quite literally alluding to the fact that in order to protect trans kids, we have to bear weapons, right? Like, what is the significance of having a knife on your shirt that says protect trans kids if you're not advocating for somebody to be holding a weapon while they do that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. And one thing I should mention though is we're talking about a biological male who's clearly in some kind of mental distress, and I think that's probably the last person you want to hand a knife. To say the least, especially when you consider the kind of venues and performances and how often they're interlaced with child performances or performances for children, I should say, and engagement with children. I think it's a very dangerous environment that is being facilitated when you have somebody who's clearly got issues up there taking the charge for an entire protest.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point, is that there's often comorbidities that go in line with gender dysphoria. And so whether that, mental health afflictions, autism, behavioral stuff, otherwise bipolar, so on and so forth, there's often kind of a mixed bag of mental health issues that are happening kind of simultaneously when you have a gender dysphoric individual. And alluding to the fact that they should be brandishing knives, that is just, I can't believe that this is literally the Grand Marshal for the Capitol Pride Parade. Yeah, there he is on stage with his Protect Trans Kids t-shirt. And repeatedly I hear this idea that, oh, if you question gender identity or sexual orientation, or if you question the appropriateness or the necessity of this to be taught indiscriminately in schools or coming into our school libraries or being paraded in the public streets with displays of nudity and sexuality and other things, if you question all of that and it's direct targeting at kids, at children, at our youngest, most vulnerable demographics, then that somehow is violent. And that somehow is advocating violence against trans kids, and we must protect them against, this line of questioning. That to me just seems so absolutely absurd and outlandish, when these are parents often who obviously care very deeply about their children, their innocence, protecting their impressionable minds from inappropriate content and things that are just not appropriate. Like, at the end of the day, this stuff is not appropriate. It's not necessary. And it has nothing to do with raising a robust child who will not have a formal, strong sense of their identity until they're well into their 20s. I mean, let's just let kids be kids. Why do we have to say that we should brandish knives in order to protect trans kids? And, Billboard Chris goes around and he just literally asks these people, what is a trans kid? What is that? What's the definition of a trans kid? And they can't answer it because it's absurd and outlandish. And the whole thing just is really absurd and outlandish to me. Then you have Fae Johnstone, a male, advocating with a knife shirt to protect trans kids. Which, what even are trans kids?
Yeah. Well, and they say don't question it, but what is that? That is the same as saying you don't use your critical thinking skills. You are supposed to question things in your life. Everything in your life you should question at least sometime, so that you can have a greater understanding of what it is that you're actually invested in or involved with. But they don't want you to question that. They don't want you to question the education that they're trying to put into your kids' education rooms. That is a very sad thing, I think, and it speaks to the disassociation that government has has with parents and children. They think of them as two different categories, which is a very, very sad thing. And talking about all this, trans identifying stuff, it's such a confusing concept for a child. And what do? They walk in and they basically say, okay, what are you? They hand a child a list of all these different things. Actually, I'm going to interrupt myself. There was a video I saw recently. I'm not sure if it was old or not, but it was a woman talking with her child. I think Ian Miles Strong actually might have tweeted about this, but it was a woman talking to her child, and her child was a boy, and this was happening in the UK or Australia, and the boy said, the boy who was identifying as a female or as a baby, girl, asked the mother, would you be okay if I was a boy or something like that? And they were talking about how they have feelings about being a boy, even though they're currently identifying and going through hormonal therapies that would identify them as a female. This kind of mental derangement is not, that's the one. I don't know if, we can hear what they say there, but it's absolutely tragic to see the mental implications this has on our children. And it's followed up by permanent damage, whether it be through their hormones or physically having surgery done on them. There's physical damage that's happening to these children because of this promotion of a gender ideology by people who are clearly mentally unstable.
That's right. And we had an entire campaign to fire Fae Johnstone because he really took over as a spokesperson for women, right? His voice was amplified over the voices of actual biological women at the Regina YWCA, which is a women's organization with a mandate to eliminate racism, but also to empower women and I guess stand up for social justice, help families and strengthen communities. And he is the biological male who was hired on behalf of that institution to speak to the voice of women's issues. So this is really rooted, in my opinion, in misogyny. He's a biologically male trans identified person known as Zach Johnstone. And so now you see him as this alter ego Fae popping up as, what did they call him? The Grand Marshal. And as a spokesperson. I guess he's not a spokeswoman or a spokesman. He would have to be a spokesperson. And this is really a slap in the face to biological women who are actually involved in the issues that face women. When you have a biological male speaking about women's issues, this is just such bizarro, upside down world things. And it's really concerning. We have people like former Global News reporter, I think she was, if I could call her that, Rachel Gilmore, retweeting photos with this misogynist. I think she called it an ocean of love at the trans pride parade. And you see this photo, I don't know if we can just pull it up here of Rachel Gilmore and Fae Johnstone. And they literally look like brother and sister, but I guess they would now be brother or sister and sister. I think our editor-in-chief, Sheila Gunn-Reid, had a good tweet about it. She said, this is a prime example of what you ordered versus what you got. Like the similarities between the two. I think they probably use the same box dye, their hair color. But the whole thing is just absolutely absurd. She calls Fae Johnstone a fearless. We're so lucky to have fearless folks like Fae Johnstone in this city. We're the most badass redhead in person. She met the most badass redhead in person today.
Well, I could be a pretty badass person too. Tomorrow I could become an Olympic athlete. I would just have to identify as a woman. And the fact of the matter is I could probably actually win something. And I would destroy decades of work, and maybe not decades for some people, but decades of work for true female athletes that have put their lives into, let's say, swimming, or let's say cycling, or any kind of physical exercise out there. Most categories, if I wanted to train up and I decided I wanted to identify as a woman, I already have a major advantage. Not only that, if I wanted to, or let's say, worst comes to worst, knock on wood, I get some serious charges and have to go to jail or prison for a long period of time. Well, if if I'm going to be spending a long time in jail, I'd much rather spend that time in a female prison. Much as we're seeing,
Hmm.
a bountiful amount of men in Canada now identify as a woman so that they can get into female prisons. And the majority of these men who are doing this actually have some kind of charges that are related, that are sexual in nature. And these are the
Hmm.
very ones that we're putting into female prisons. The state of affairs is absolutely sickening. And to think of somebody like this guy here being hailed as a celebrity, the Grand Marshal, a very masculine sounding term there, to see him being celebrated is an absolute tragedy. And it shows you the state of delusion in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always leads me back to wondering, where are the feminists, right? They fought so hard for equality and women's rights, and now all of that is just going into into the garbage. We're being predecessed by males, misogynists, taking over women's sport, taking over the reins for things that were, even our traditional safe spaces like bathrooms and change rooms and women's sport, and the list goes on and on. It's really bizarre to see someone, like Rachel Gilmore, who probably classifies herself somewhere along the lines as some sort of feminist, kowtow to this narrative that this is somehow good for women, to just have a man replacing their voice on key issues, like, for instance, as I mentioned, the YWC, and having them invade our safe spaces, and in a women's shelter, right? The women's shelters are a place for a woman to seek refuge from things like violence and assault. And if you have biological males just willy nilly identifying as females, like, David Menzies was out on a mission to find this trans cat, I guess, this man who identified as a woman, went into the women's shelter, sexually assaulted somebody, is being charged for anyway. Whether or not that allegation will hold up in the court of law, I don't know, but is being charged for sexual assault in a women's shelter, and now walks the streets identifying sometimes as a cat. It's really, really bizarre to see how this has manifested and festered in our, I guess, liberal democracy. And speaking of liberals, well, not only at the Ottawa Pride Festival was there a dildo ring toss. Maybe we can just show this quick clip, but where you can see kids watching, watching closely as attendees throw the rings on the dildos. I mean, the whole idea of a rainbow really appeals to children, right? It's like bright colors and all the colors of the rainbow. And this is very visually appealing for children. Like, you can see in the background there's a stroller with a young toddler, maybe even bordering like still baby age, and a young, maybe preschooler, kindergarten age child. And this is just, I mean, I hope those kids obviously don't know what exactly it is that they're looking at, but you get those core memories as a child. Maybe Sid, you have these as well. You get core memories, and then as you become an adult, you reflect on your core memories, and sometimes you're like, oh wait, that's what that was. And you can make those connections and connect those dots. And I think that some of these kids are going to be pretty deranged when they figure out just what exactly they're being exposed to at these events. And I mean, we used to really criminalize this kind of behavior, right? If you were showing children sexually explicit content or materials, or promoting it or bringing them to it, like, you used to not even be able to bring children into bars after a certain time, and now we're bringing them to these kinds of events where there's just sexuality on full display in broad daylight, and it's somehow under the guise of inclusivity and tolerance, and you better bring your kids out to this, or else you're a far right racist bigot. This is absurd. We used to jail people for this.